Hi everybody. As you can see, I'm here at the lake today, and what a beautiful day it is. I was thinking how nice it would be to go to the other side of the lake. It doesn't look that far, but it's really about a mile away, and I'm not that strong a swimmer, and I don't have a boat here today. Kind of reminds me of our Bible story today because we're talking about Jesus being in a boat with some of his disciples. And he said to them, I want you to go from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other. Now, there were a number of problems with that. I got to tell you right off the bat. First of all, people who lived on one side of Galilee didn't tend to go to the other side. Not very often at all. So there was that. There was also the fact that, well, Jesus and the disciples had a boat, but it was a fishing boat. And it was pretty basic, to be honest with you. It wasn't a fancy speedboat like we have today. In fact, it looked a lot like this. So you can see it's a pretty basic boat, one mast and 1 yard to hold up the sail. Now, it could fit probably 10 people, but in essence, if it was working as a fishing boat, it really only had 5 people. There was one at the front of the boat who was the helmsman. That's a fancy word for meaning they kind of steered the boat. And then on the oars and on the seats here, there were 5 or 4 other people who dealt with the oars and who propelled the boat from one place to another. But you have to remember, this was over 2,000 years ago, and boats were not made the way they are now. And so this boat typically was only used in fairly shallow water for fishing, and it wasn't used if the weather was going to be bad, because the boat just simply wasn't that durable. And so here Jesus said, I want to go across the Sea of Galilee. Well, I mean, it was Jesus, right? So the disciples jumped in the boat and off they started. Well, before you know it, there was a storm like you've never seen before. So there was huge winds and they were rolling up the waves, and there was water probably crushing over the sides of the boat, and the disciples were afraid. What was Jesus doing? Jesus was calm, cool, and collected, sitting in the front of the boat. Actually, the Bible story tells us that he was asleep. And all of a sudden, the disciples start yelling for him, like, Jesus, Jesus, help us. And so Jesus woke up and he took one look at the storm and he said, quiet, be still. Well, what do you think happened? The wind stopped, the waves stopped crashing over the sides of the boat, and suddenly it was peaceful again. Well, it kind of shows us that Jesus is ruler of all, right? He has that power. But the disciples were amazed. And I imagine part of Jesus was thinking, why are you surprised? You've been following me around for months, for years, some of you. You've seen me heal people. You've seen me do all sorts of miracles, yet you're surprised that I can calm the weather? So I think maybe he was questioning the disciples' faith a little bit. Here they were in this boat that wasn't supposed to withstand a storm, and suddenly everything was calm and they were safe. I'm going to come back to the story of the boat in a minute, but let's look at this concept of Jesus and the faith of the disciples. So they had seen that Jesus was able to calm the weather. Well, any of us know it's hard enough to predict the weather, much less do anything about it, right? It really is one of those things that's out of our control. If it's going to rain today, well, it's going to rain. And if the sun's out, that's great, but we have no control over that. But Jesus does. Jesus and God have supreme control over everything in our lives. And here's Jesus questioning the faith of his disciples. He's like saying, have you not seen enough to know that I'm with you always? Well, I think about that in my life, and I think, you know what? There is no promise that life's going to be easy or that there aren't going to be problems from time to time. And I can't make them go away, and I can't make every day happy for myself or the people I love. But I do know that God and that Jesus are with me through all those hard times. And it strengthened my faith to know that whatever happens to me or whatever happens to the people I love, I know that I'm going through it with Jesus. And I just need to call upon him and his help, and he'll be there. That's an incredible story of faith, isn't it? Not only could Jesus stop the storm from happening, but he kept all his disciples, his favorite people, safe on the sea. That's really our message for today, is to embrace the fact that we have that faith and that we can call on Jesus whenever we're in trouble, whenever there are times of storms in our lives. Now, if you just want to take that message and move on, that's okay. But if you have a couple more minutes, I want to tell you some kind of cool things that I found out about the Jesus boat, or the boat of Galilee. Now, we know that right now we have speedboats, motorboats, all sorts of things that go really, really fast, and they take hardly any care, and most of them are made of fiberglass, and we don't need to worry about them rotting in bad weather. But that wasn't always the case. 2,000 years ago, Jesus and his disciples had very, very different kinds of boats. Now, I showed you the picture of the boat that Jesus and his disciples would likely have sailed in, right? That's pretty basic. Do you want to know something super cool? In 1986, before you guys were even born, but I was around, there was a drought in the Sea of Galilee. Now, in the Sea of Galilee, that's where Jesus and his disciples did a lot of fishing. Fishing for fish and fishing for men, right? Making disciples of all of us. Well, back in 1986, there was a drought in and around Israel, and the water levels of the Sea of Galilee went down and down and down. And one day, two brothers were walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and they found a boat. They found the remnants of a boat, and they have since dated it to the 1st century. So it's a boat that was around in Jesus' time. Heck, it might even be a boat that Jesus had been in, that Jesus had sailed the Sea of Galilee in. Isn't that amazing? Now, let me show you what that boat looked like. It looked a little bit like this, and you can see it's pretty beaten up. There are just some boards, but this is where the story gets really cool, because these brothers told people in their kibbutz, in their community where they lived in Israel on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, that they thought they had found a Galilee boat, a fishing boat dating back to the time of Jesus. And so they decided that they wanted to dig it out of where it was and move it to a museum in Israel. Then all of us would be able to see it. Well, that's pretty cool. So they started working, but the work was very, very precarious, because you can imagine wood that is 2,000 years old would be pretty fragile. So they had to be super careful how they dealt with it. They couldn't even go inside the boat, into the keel of the boat. They had to put a scaffolding along the top and then lie on the scaffolding, and they worked meticulously, very slowly, to dig out the mud from around the boat. Well, they finally did that, and they had this shell of a boat, like the picture I just showed you, and they thought, well, we have to take this to a place where everybody can see it. So they wanted to float it to the museum. So they get the boat off the shores of Galilee and they move it out into the water. Well, the problem is there are holes all everywhere, so the boat is going to sink. So they decided that they needed to do something else. So one brilliant guy decided, let's cover it with foam insulation. Now, you might see that in the attic in your house, or maybe in the garage plugging up some holes. They covered this whole boat inside and out with foam insulation, And when it was totally encapsulated and safe, they floated it across the Sea of Galilee to the museum where it's on display today. Imagine, you could see a boat that the disciples or Jesus himself might actually have sailed in. That is one of the most amazing things that I can imagine. Now, before it came to rest in this museum, they knew that if the wood started to dry out, then the whole boat could collapse. So a scientist, a brilliant scientist, figured out a way to replace the water that was stored in the keel and in the boards of the boat. They replaced that water with wax. And so to do that, they had to put this boat in a special bath for 7 years. That's older than some of you are. Anyway, right now, the boat is pretty much restored and it's sitting in a museum in Israel. And I think that's pretty incredible. So that's a little lesson for you about archaeology and digging out precious things that we find in the earth. But the best message of today is that we have to have faith, even more faith than the disciples had in that boat tour that they took with Jesus. Jesus was able to calm the storm, and Jesus is able to calm our storms. Nobody ever promised that this life would be easy or would come without problems or disappointments. But the good news is Jesus is with us through all of that. And God is watching over all of us. That's the message to take with you today. Faith is such a beautiful blessing that we have in our lives, thanks to the life of Jesus. Praise God. Have a great day. I'll see you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.